Hi class, it's Miss Garcia. For today's video, I'm going to be reading from paragraph 15 all the way to the end. And what I'll do is I will stop after each paragraph and analyze it with you. Now notice I have already annotated the text, so go ahead and try to duplicate that onto your text as well as I'm reading. And I don't want you to stress out or anything. I'm not expecting you to finish this whole text in one day. You do have today and tomorrow to finish listening to the audio, annotating your text, and then to answer the questions. And if you guys have any questions at all, you can always email me. I will be on campus and I will try to help you. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So again, we're starting on paragraph 15. After a while, he had already moved so far across that it would have been hard for him to keep his balance if he rocked too hard. The time was now 10 past 7, and he would have to make a final decision very soon. Then there was a ring at the door of the flat. That'll be someone from work, he said to himself, and froze very still, although his little legs only became all the more lively as they danced around. For a moment everything remained quiet. They're not opening the door, Gregor said to himself, caught in some nonsensical hope. But then, of course, the maid's firm footsteps went to the door as ever and opened it. Gregor only needed to hear the visitor's first words of greeting, and he knew who it was, the chief clerk himself. Why did Gregor have to be the only one condemned to work for a company where they immediately became highly suspicious at the slightest shortcoming? Were all employees, every one of them, louts? Was there not one of them who was faithful and devoted, who would go so mad with pangs of consciousness that he couldn't get out of bed if he didn't spend at least a couple of hours in the morning on company business? Was it really not enough to let one of the trainees make inquiries, assuming inquiries were even necessary? Did the chief clerk have to come himself, and did they have to show the whole innocent family that this was so suspicious that only the chief clerk could be trusted to have the wisdom to investigate it? And more because these thoughts had made him upset than through any proper decision, he swung himself with all his force out of the bed. There was a loud thump, but it wasn't really a loud noise. His fall was softened a little by the carpet, and Gregor's back was also more elastic than he had thought, which made the sound muffled and not too noticeable. He had not held his head carefully enough, though, and it hit as he fell. Annoyed and in pain, he turned it and rubbed it against the carpet. So let's go ahead and analyze paragraph 15. So here he's trying to move, and again he notes the time. The time was now 10 past 7, and he'd have to make a final decision very soon. On your packet, I would like you to underline that because, again, we're speaking about time, and you'll notice that Kafka continues to include the time in his text. And I'd like you to notate, why do you think Kafka continues to do this? And what does its repeated mention reinforce about who Gregor is as a person? Why is time so important to Gregor? Like, from the minute he wakes up, that's all he can think about is the time, the time, the time. I've also highlighted, they're not opening the door, Gregor said to himself, caught in some nonsensical hope. Nonsensical means that it does not make sense, so his hope has no sense to it. And then quickly, those hopes are dashed. So he's kind of hoping against hope that they just won't answer the door, and then they quickly do. And right off the bat, Gregor hears a voice that he knows all too well and in reality despises, and it's the chief clerk himself. And then Gregor thinks to himself, why did it have to be him that they would come and check on? Because remember, we know that Gregor is a hard worker. He never has missed any days, and he tries very, very hard to stay on top of things because he is trying to pay the debt back. Yet the minute he misses the train, they're checking on him. And what does that tell you about how they feel towards Gregor? Down here, I did highlight, did the chief clerk have to come himself? So this is important because, again, they don't send any like lackey or underling to come check on Gregor. It is the chief clerk himself. So it's almost as if they're out to get him. And, or at least this is what Gregor feels, right? Like, they can't just send anybody to come check on me. It has to be him. And he's very, very worried about it. And more because of these thoughts, he throws himself out of bed. So all this time he's kind of been trying to slowly get out of bed and it's not working. But the minute he hears the clerk's voice, he is riled up and he throws himself out. And again, he's excited because he actually gets off the bed, but then he does hurt himself, which was actually a worry that he had before. And that's why I went ahead and highlighted that, because it kind of tells you that he was right. If he was to throw himself off the bed, he might hurt himself. So he was proven right in that. So let's go ahead and move on to paragraph 16. Something's fallen down in there, said the chief clerk in the room on the left. Gregor tried to imagine whether something of the sort that had happened to him today could ever happen to the chief clerk, too. You had to concede that it was possible. But as if in a gruff reply to this question, the chief clerk's firm footsteps and his highly polished boots could now be heard in the adjoining room. From the room on his right, Gregor's sister whispered to him to let him know, "Gregor, the chief clerk is here." "Yes, I know," said Gregor to himself, but without daring to raise his voice loud enough for his sister to hear him. "Gregor," said his father now from the room to his left, "the chief clerk has come round and wants to know why you didn't leave on the early train. We don't know what to say to him, and anyway, he wants to speak to you personally. So please open this door. I'm sure he'll be good enough to forgive the untidiness of your room." Then the chief clerk called, "Good morning, Mr. Samsa." "He isn't well," said his mother to the chief clerk, while his father continued to speak through the door. "He isn't well, please believe me. Why else would Gregor have missed the train? The lad only ever thinks about the business. It nearly makes me cross the way he never goes out into the evenings. He's been in town for a week now, but stayed home every evening. He sits with us in the kitchen and just reads the paper or studies train timetables. His idea of relaxation is working with his fret saw. He made his little frame, for instance. It's only took him 2 or 3 evenings. You'll be amazed how nice it is. It's hanging up in his room. You'll see it as soon as Gregor opens the door. Anyways, I'm glad you're here. We wouldn't have been able to get Gregor to open the door by ourselves. He's so stubborn, and I'm sure he isn't well. He said this morning that he is, but he isn't. I'll be there in a moment," said Gregor slowly and thoughtfully, but without moving so that he could not miss any word of the conversation. "Well, I can't think of any other way of explaining it, Mr. Samsa," said the chief clerk. "I hope it's nothing serious, but on the other hand, I must say that if we people in commerce ever become slightly unwell, then, fortunately or unfortunately, as you like, we simply have to overcome it because of the business considerations." "Can the chief clerk come in to see you now, then?" asked his father impatiently, knocking on the door again. "No," said Gregor. In the room on his right there followed a painful silence. In the room on his left his sister began to cry. So let's look back at paragraph 16. I underlined Gregor's sister whispered to him to let him know Gregor, the chief clerk, is here. Because to me this is reinforcing that his sister really does care about him and is very worried about him. Also, I do want you to indicate why it's important that the chief clerk is actually there, and pay close attention to the things that the chief clerk is actually saying. I also underlined everything that the chief clerk said. I would like you to do the same. Underline everything the chief clerk is saying because it's very significant. And also what his father says to him. It's very evident that the father is very deferential to the chief clerk. Deferential means like he defers to him. He's kind of almost like afraid of him. And so the father is trying to make all these excuses for Gregor. So underline anything the father says and anything the chief clerk says. I also highlighted what they say about Gregor himself. Because remember, I want you to highlight things that indicate who Gregor is as a person. We now know that he's been in town for about a week, and he stayed home every night. So he has no friends. Again, we've realized that he's very lonely. But now we also get a mention of that gilded frame, but now we know that Gregor made it. So this indicates that Gregor might be better with his hands because remember, it was a very beautiful frame. And obviously, Gregor is proud of it because he hangs it in his room. I have underlined again everything that the chief clerk has said, and I want you to indicate what does the clerk's statements indicate about the thoughts the clerk holds about work and the employees, and why do you think Kafka includes the clerk's response? Because he says, well, I can't think of any other way of explaining it. I hope it's nothing serious. But then he says, if people in commerce, which is business, ever become slightly unwell, then they simply need to overcome it and go to work. So he's saying that illness is not an excuse for not being at work. And then we have here, I felt it was important that the sister begins to cry. This indicates that the sister realizes things are not going to work out for Gregor. And this is kind of foreshadowing what might happen to Gregor himself. So let's move on to paragraph 18. So why did his sister not go and join the others? She had probably only just got up and had not even begun to get dressed. And why was she crying? Was it because he had not got up and had not let the chief clerk in because he was in danger of losing his job? And if that happened, his boss would once more pursue their parents with the same demands as before? There was no need to worry about things like that yet. Gregor was still there and had not the slightest intention of abandoning his family. For the time being, he just lay there on the carpet, and no one who knew the condition he was in would seriously have expected him to let the chief clerk in. It was only a minor discourtesy, and a suitable excuse could easily be found for it later on. It was not something for which Gregor could be sacked on the spot, and it seemed to Gregor much more sensible to leave him now in peace instead of disturbing him with talking at him and crying. But the others did not know what was happening. They were worried, and that would excuse their behavior. So why do you think again the sister is crying and not joining the others? I tend to feel that it indicates her care for him, but also her worry that things are going badly for him. But do you agree or disagree with me? Just let me know. So I did underline again that his sister did not go to join them, and he also wonders why was she crying. And he begins to wonder if she's more worried about him losing his job. Um, it doesn't seem like he even thinks that maybe she's just simply concerned for him. She he kind of places his own worries on his sister and thinking that she's worried about the parents. But it seems like the sister really does care for Gregor. I also highlighted two different statements. Gregor was still there and had not the slightest intention of abandoning his family. So even though his family doesn't seem too concerned about what's going on with him, other than the fact that he's not at work, he still has every intention of taking care of them. And then he starts to also think, you know, about courtesy and could this get him fired and, how he could make excuses later. Okay, so this is a pretty long paragraph. I did underline everything in it because it is the chief clerk's response. So you do need to notate that it is the chief clerk's response. Now, if you don't want to underline everything, remember how I showed you that you could make those little marks on the side. Just draw a line down the whole paragraph so that you know that it's the chief clerk. So, paragraph 19. The chief clerk now raised his voice. Mr. Samsa, he called to him, what is wrong? You barricade yourself in your room, give us no more than yes or no for an answer, and you are causing serious and unnecessary concern to your parents, and you fail, and I mention this just by the way, you fail to carry out your business duties in a way that is quite unheard of. I'm speaking here on behalf of your parents and of your employer, and really must request a clear and immediate explanation. I am astonished, quite astonished. I thought I knew you as a calm and sensible person, and now you suddenly seem to be showing off with peculiar whims. This morning, your employer did suggest a possible reason for your failure to appear. It's true. It had to do with the money that was recently entrusted to you. But I came near to giving him my word of honor that it could not be the right explanation. By now that but now that I see your incomprehensible stubbornness, I no longer feel any wish whatsoever to intercede on your behalf, and nor is it your position all that secure. I have originally intended to say all this to you in private, but since you caused me to waste my time here for no good reason, I don't see why your parents should not also learn of it. Your turnover has been very unsatisfactory of late. I grant you that it's not the time of year to do especially good business. We recognize that. But there simply is no time of year to do no business at all. Mr. Samsa, we cannot allow there to be. Okay, so paragraph 19, completely dedicated to the chief clerk. So I want you to write on the side, what kind of man is the clerk? And do you think that Gregor is right to feel the way he does about the clerk? Also, we get a little bit of information here that his work has entrusted money to Gregor, which is kind of interesting seeing as Gregor's family already owes his boss money. So why would they give him more money? Maybe we'll find out. But I really want you to focus on everything that the chief clerk says and consider what kind of position it's putting Gregor in. Does the chief clerk really have good intentions of warning Gregor, or is he trying to make even Gregor's family doubt him? So this will be one of the questions that you might have to answer later in an essay, so just pay close attention to it. Let's move on to paragraph 20. But, sir, called Gregor beside himself and forgetting all else in the excitement, I'll open up immediately. Just a moment. I'm slightly unwell. An attack of dizziness. I haven't been able to get up. I'm still in bed now. I'm quite fresh again now, though. I'm just getting out of bed. Just a moment. Be patient. It's not quite as easy as I thought. I'm quite all right now, though. It's shocking what can suddenly happen to a person. I was quite all right last night. My parents know about it, perhaps better than me. I had a small symptom of it last night already. They must have noticed it. I don't know why I didn't let you know at work, but you always think you can get over an illness without staying at home. Please don't make my parents suffer. There's no basis for any of the accusations you're making. No one's ever said a word to me about any of these things. Maybe you haven't read the latest contracts I sent in. I'll set off with the 8 o'clock train as well. These few hours of rest have given me strength. You don't need to wait, sir. I'll be in the office soon after you, and please be so good as to tell that to the boss and recommend me to him. So, paragraph 20 is nothing but dialogue from Gregor. And I rushed it on purpose because he seems to be panicking. So I went ahead and I do want you to box it because his response is also quite important. And we learn a lot of information in this. Gregor is making excuses for himself. So not really to worry the boss, and if you notice, his parents. In the whole response, he says, please don't make my parents suffer. So again, all he's thinking about is his parents. And he's just worried that the chief clerk is making them worry. So on the side, I do want you to think about Gregor's response. What do you think about it? And what does it tell us about who Gregor is, especially when he's worried? So let's go ahead and move on to paragraph 21. And while Gregor gushed out these words, hardly knowing what he was saying, he made his way over to the chest of drawers. This was easily done, probably because of the practice he had already had in bed, where he now tried to get himself upright. He really did want to open the door, really did want to let them see him, and to speak with the chief clerk. The others were being so insistent, and he was curious to learn what they would say when they caught sight of him. If they were shocked, then it would no longer be Gregor's responsibility, and he could rest. If, however, they took everything calmly, he would still have no reason to be upset, and if he hurried, he really could be at the station for 8 o'clock. The first few times he tried to climb up on the smooth chest of drawers, he just slid down again. But he finally gave himself one last swing and stood there upright. The lower part of his body was in serious pain, but he could no longer give any attention to it. Now he let himself fall against the back of a nearby chair and held tightly to the edges of it with his little legs. By now he had also calmed down and kept quiet so that he could listen to what the chief clerk was saying. So let's look at that really quick. I did highlight he really did want to open the door because this indicates that who Gregor really is. His intentions are to do his job. He wants to talk to them. He wants to make sure that they know what's going on. And I underlined this part because I want you to tell me if you think it's Kafkaesque or not. He's sitting there saying, okay, if they see me as this giant roach, they'll understand. But if they're calm, then I can be calm about being a roach, and I can still like get on the train at 8 o'clock, which is kind of surreal if you think about it. I don't know how you would react seeing a huge human-sized roach walking and trying to get on the 8 o'clock train, but it would be a little unnerving. He again mentions that the lower part of his body is in serious pain, but he's not paying attention to it. So all these things are happening to Gregor, and he's just not paying attention to himself anymore. He is so worried about everybody else. And then he talks about how he's calmed down. And let's go ahead and see what happens. Paragraph 22. Did you understand a word of all that? The chief clerk asked his parents. Surely he's not trying to make fools of us. Oh God, called his mother, who was already in tears. He could be seriously ill and we're making him suffer. Greta, Greta, she then cried. Mother, his sister called from the other side. They communicated across Gregor's room. You'll have to go to the doctor straight away. Gregor is ill. Quick, get the doctor. Did you hear the way Gregor spoke just now? That was the voice of an animal, said the chief clerk, with the calmness that was in contrast to his mother's screams. Anna, Anna, his father called in the kitchen through the entrance hall, clapping his hands. Get the locksmith here now. And the two girls, with their skirts swishing, immediately ran out through the hall, wrenching open the front door of the flat as they went. How had his sister managed to get dressed so quickly? There was no sound of the door banging shut again. They must have left it open. People often do in homes where something awful has happened. So I want you to underline again the chief clerk's statement. And what can we infer about his statement? And I highlighted in a different color, oh God, called his mother. He is seriously ill. Because this is the first time the mother actually shows any form of concern for Gregor, outside of the fact that he's not at work. And I also highlighted the voice of an animal because that also indicates that now his voice is also changing. Okay, so they've sent for help, and let's see what happens. Paragraph 23. Gregor, in contrast, had become much calmer, so they couldn't understand his words anymore. Although they seemed clear enough to him, clearer than before, perhaps his ears had become used to the sound. They had realized, though, that there was something wrong with him and were ready to help. The first response to his situation had been confident and wise, and that made him feel better. He felt that he had been drawn back in among people. And from the doctor and the locksmith he expected great and surprising achievements, although he did not really distinguish one from the other. Whatever was said next would be crucial, so in order to make his voice as clear as possible, he coughed a little, but taking care to do this not too loudly, as ever this might well sound different from the way that a human coughs, and he was no longer sure he could judge this for himself. Meanwhile, it had become very quiet in the next room. Perhaps his parents were sat at the table whispering with the chief clerk, or perhaps they were all pressed against the door and listening. So this is an interesting paragraph because Gregor is very calm and actually reassured by the way that his family is reacting and that they are looking for help. So he's kind of calm in himself, but he's also very concerned about what they're saying. So notice that he's not worried about being a roach anymore. He's worried about what are they saying? Are they at the table talking about me, or are they at the door listening to me? Um, and so he also indicates that he can no longer judge for himself how he's changing. So that's kind of interesting. I mean, you would think that you would notice if your voice was changing, but he's saying maybe his ears have become used to it. I'm interested to see what you guys think. Paragraph 24. Gregor slowly pushed his way over to the door with the chair. Once there, he let go of it and threw himself onto the door, holding himself upright against it, using the adhesives on the tips of his legs. He rested there a little while to recover from the effort involved, and then set himself to the task of turning the key in the lock with his mouth. He seemed, unfortunately, to have no proper teeth. How was he then to grasp the key? But the lack of teeth was, of course, made up for with a very strong jaw. Using the jaw, he really was able to start the key. Turning, ignoring the fact that he must have been causing some kind of damage as brown fluid came from his mouth, flowed over the key, and dripped onto the floor. Listen, said the chief clerk in the next room. He's turning the key. Gregor was greatly encouraged by this, but they all should have been calling to him, his father and his mother too. Well done, Gregor, they should have cried. Keep at it, keep hold of the lock. And with that idea that they were all excitedly following his efforts, he bit on the key with all his strength, paying no attention to the pain he was causing himself. As the key turned round, he turned round with the lock with it, only holding himself upright with his mouth, and hung onto the key and pushed it down again with the whole weight of his body as needed. The clear sound of the lock as it snapped back was Gregor's sign that he could break his concentration, and as he regained his breath, he said to himself, "So I didn't need the locksmith after all." Then he lay his head on the handle of the door to open it completely. All right, so again, Gregor is putting himself at great jeopardy and causing himself pain, um, just to make sure that he can, get out there to speak to his family and stop causing any problems for them. I've highlighted everything that indicates the way he's changed. He has adhesive on his legs. He has no teeth, but he has a jaw, and there's brown fluid coming out of him. So he's very much hurting himself, and he does not seem to care. So I do want you to note, why is Gregor so determined, and what does this determination indicate about him? And it's obvious that the chief clerk was listening because he notices that something's going on with the key. Also, I want you to note that Gregor is like, why isn't his parents saying anything? That they should be congratulating him. And so this is evident that Gregor has longed for his parents' approval for a very long time, but he just hasn't received it. And again, to ensure that everything is okay with his family, he is paying no attention to the pain he is causing himself. And so let's go ahead and end it with paragraph 25. Because he had to open the door this way, it was already wide open before he could be seen. He had first to slowly turn himself round one of the double doors, and he had to do it very carefully if he did not want to fall flat on his back before entering the room. He was still occupied with this difficult movement, unable to pay attention to anything else, when he heard the chief clerk exclaim a loud "Oh!" which sounded like a sloshing of the wind. Now he also saw him. He was nearest to the door, his hand pressed against his open mouth and slowly retreating as if driven by a steady and invisible force. Gregor's mother, her hair still disheveled from bed despite the chief clerk's being there, looked at his father. Then she unfolded her arms, took 2 steps forward towards Gregor, and sank down onto the floor into her skirts that spread themselves out around her as her head disappeared down onto her breast. His father looked hostile and clenched his fist as if wanting to knock Gregor back into his room. Then he looked uncertainly around the living room, covered his eyes with his hands, and wept so that his powerful chest shook. So I do want you to box that, their reactions, because I want you also to notate, what does each person's reaction highlight about how they feel about or towards Gregor, and especially the way the clerk is reacting. It's almost like he's driven backwards. What is driving him backwards? Is it because of shock, or is it really that, Gregor looks so gross? I mean, he's a giant roach. So this is the end of the excerpt that we have. Again, I have attached the PDF if you want to continue reading it. I'm going to go ahead and put a couple of questions for you guys to answer in the assignment. It will lock at bell, so do make sure that you get it in by the Tuesday end of your class period. And again, if you have any questions, just email me. I really do hope you've liked this story. It is a little creepy and very Kafka-esque, if I should say so myself. And I will talk to you later. Bye.